Hi, Martha Nichols. I just thought I'd greet you all with this sign that says, "Welcome friends to my iris gardens." I'll show you more crafty iris things later, but right now let's enjoy the flowers. I'll do a quick overview, and then I'm going to come back and talk a little bit more about what colors these are and what different kinds of iris there are. So this is the garden. And some of these are what are called early iris, that bloom now. Some of them come later. They all have names. I started out reading a book called The World of Iris. This comes from the American Iris Society, and it tells you all about iris, what kind of, how bad they can get, how sick they can get, all kinds of iris. It shows you colors. But I think one of the most exciting things that I found in this book was that every year the American Iris Society picks what they call a Dykes Medal winner. It's an iris that's considered the outstanding iris of the year. People think there's only 2 or 3 colors. There are thousands of colors. And this medal started in 1927, so that's a long time ago. And so since then they've been naming these iris. Many of these iris are Dykes Medal winners. Like for instance, this one right there is a Dykes Medal winner. And actually so is this one over here. And this one is called Needlepoint. And it's usually considered an early iris. These yellow ones, this yellow, actually came from my father's garden. My parents have been gone for a long time. Came from their house. I found out eventually by going to some iris places and looking at iris that I think this is called David. So that's what I call it. And that's also significant because I have a cousin David, so that I remember now. The yellow one is in Spanish, Cata de Oro. It's usually taller than this year. Some of these they change from year to year a little bit. They get taller and sometimes they get thinner. This iris over here, I don't remember the name of, but this actually comes, I have a roommate in Cleveland, Ohio, and Marie's very involved in the garden club. And when she sees an iris that's for sale and it doesn't get sold, she saves it and she gives it to me. And there was a little one, you can see some of the remnants of a little different colored one right there. That also came from Marie in Cleveland. That was very pretty a couple weeks ago, but it bloomed very early. This iris here is a Siberian iris, which I know many of you have. It has a few buds coming along here. This came from a pond there in North Madison on the Nichols farm, as I call it. So that's a Nichols iris. It's actually a Siberian iris. Most of these iris, let's continue. This one is probably Ken's favorite, and only because of its name. It's called Immortality. And the wonderful thing about Immortality is it blooms again in the fall. It's what they call a reblooming iris. Not too many of them do it, but Immortality does. And it's one of Ken's favorites. He loves this white one. That one back there is called Matinata, M-A-T-I-N-A-T-A, Matinata. This one is called Study in Black. It's not really black, but it's getting closer. And that one that I mentioned that's a Dykes Medal winner is called Twist of Fate. Which is that one. So, they're all coming along. I'm also going to show you something over here. As you can see, in this space here, there are some other plants that don't look like iris, and they aren't. That's because once the iris go by, and I can cut back the stems and cut back the daffodils that you see sort of there too and get to the weeding, I like to have something that grows from then until frost kills it. And what I like to raise is zinnias or cosmos or sunflowers, because they're tall enough to go above the iris leaves and still produce a flower all the way till fall. So these are the beginning of the zinnias. That's what these little plants are here that I haven't planted yet. So hopefully they are supposed to get up to 40 inches tall. So by that time they'll have outgrown the iris and they'll bloom from then till fall. And that's when the flower bed, takes over a different color. Those are daylilies, of course, and they are going to have to be thinned. As you can see, they're taking over the corner. Yeah. The other half of the bed is pretty much the same color irises as on this side. Originally, when we moved to this house, Ken and I made a raised bed in the backyard, and that's where I put these iris. I brought 25 different colors from our house in Pennsylvania. I had 150. I brought 25, and I put them in that raised bed. Well, all these trees, you can't really see them, but the backyard is full of trees, and it kept the iris in the shade. They weren't very happy back there. They didn't bloom very well, and they were obviously not very happy. So I said to him, I've got to move the iris to the front because this faces the south and this gets all the light. But in the meantime, there were big bushes here. So we had these big bushes dug out, and I created this flower bed. This was about, I would say, 6 years ago. It was before I got into all my surgical procedures, fortunately. So that's how it was put here. And this coming year, I'm definitely going to have to thin them. So if people are interested in certain colors, or you want some iris, I'm going to probably thin a lot. I can see Melissa raising her hand. I know some other people that have already said, please, Martha. Yes, we'd love to. So anyway, well, I definitely need to do some thinning, which may be why some of them aren't blooming, because they may be too thick. I wanted to talk about iris. I don't know how many of you have them, and unfortunately they don't stay in blossom a long time. Their season is fairly short, especially if we start to have hot days. These will go by very quickly. But they're so beautiful when they're here that I just love them. They're my favorites by far. But they have a couple of problems you have to look out for. One of them is iris borers, which is like a worm. Gets into what is called the rhizome. It's not called a bulb, it's called a rhizome. And the rhizome has to be, I think you can see that here. The rhizome has to be above the ground. They don't want to be under the dirt. They want to be above the ground. And they get into that bulb, rhizome, and eat it up, and that kills your iris. And borers can be a real problem. The other problem is fungus. But you can get sprays of various kinds and spray them, and that kind of takes care of the fungus thing. And you'll know that they have fungus when the leaves start to turn brown. Then that's a sign usually that they have a fungus. So those are the kind of major things that you look out for when you're raising iris. Okay, turn it off a second. Just all of you to know that once you leave my iris garden outside and come in my house, then you're going to see that many more iris, except hanging on the wall or as a pillow or as a Lenox porcelain or various places. Some of these things, none of these things actually I made, but I do have some iris that I've actually embroidered myself. But none of these. But anyway, I think it's, so even though iris season stops, in my house, iris bloom all year long. And that's one of the most important things I think about loving certain kinds of flowers, is you can find pieces that allow you to enjoy it all year long. So enjoy the iris, and when I break up the supply this fall, I'll be happy to give away some iris rhizomes, and so next year there'll be all kinds of iris all over the area. One lady said to me once, she said, "When I see an iris, Martha, I think of you." And I said to myself, that's probably the nicest compliment somebody could give me, is if I remind them of an iris, and irises make them think of me, then that's a very nice way to be thought of. So, and that's also why, if you look at my email, it says Iris Queen. And that's because our daughters, both daughters, call themselves the Iris Princesses, and I'm the Iris Queen. So we all love iris. So here's to iris.